Welcome back. Shalom Aleichem. I want to tell you, I am so excited for this week's Shiur. I've actually written an article just a couple of weeks ago, probably 2 weeks ago, right before the yeshiva break. I wrote an article because I feel very, very strongly about this idea. What's just so magical about Torah is that, and really just enthralling at all times, is that Chazal's ancient wisdom is very, very contemporary all the time. And when you find that out, when you find how real and pertinent and contemporary, I guess is the best word, these statements that resonated with people in the 5th century and the 12th century and with us in the 21st century is just awesome. And there is a Gemara that we're going to learn that I think is, it might seem like it's not related, but I think it's unbelievably important and unbelievably relevant. First of all, just this idea that Torah is always relevant. We know that, if you, the Torah tells us the dates for all of the Chagim. Okay, we know that Yom Kippur is on the 10th of Tishrei. We know that Pesach is on Tesvav on the 15th of Nisan. We know that Sukkot is on the 15th of Tishrei. We know when Rosh Hashanah is. There's only one holiday that is in the Torah that we don't know the exact date. Meaning, Shavuos is not given a particular specific date. The Torah doesn't tell us that we have to celebrate Shavuos on the 6th of Sivan or on the 7th of Sivan. We figure it out because it's 50 days after Mimacharat HaShabbat, and the Gemara interprets that from the second day of Pesach. So we figure out the date, but the Torah does not specifically say the date of when we have to celebrate Shavuos. And the Magen Avraham, in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, teaches why is that? Why dafka by Shavuos do we not have the specific date? And he explains beautifully that Torah can't be confined to a specific time. Right? Shavuos is Zman Matan Torah. When we were given the Torah, when we've accepted the Torah. So you can't fix the Torah into a specific Zman, into a specific time. And that is hinted at, or the symbolism of that is that we don't really know the specific date. Sukkot is a time. Pesach is a time. But Torah, right? Torah permeates all and transcends time at all times, right? So we live in a very, very dangerous time. We live in a time where when you disagree with someone, so that is horrible, and you're treif and you're puzzle, and two people can't even speak. If I'm pro this candidate, and you're, obviously we just finished the election, we just finished the inauguration, but still, it could be over anything. People just feel that they are always correct, and it's very difficult to have a conversation with other people, and it's very difficult to hear the other side of a certain issue. So I want to share a Gemara, and the real kunz at the very end. Sometimes I give away the whole shiur at the beginning. The end of the shiur is absolutely marvelous. So the Gemara tells us it's a well-known Gemara. It's a well-known Gemara because it's going to teach us an important phrase that we have in Yahadus. On the source sheet, we have the Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara is on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Amar Abba Amar Shmuel. Gimel Shanim, for 3 years, Nechlechu Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, that the camps, the schools of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued. They fought. They didn't fight physically. They fought within their Torah ideas. For 3 years, Halalu Omrim Halacha Kemosenu. One side said the halacha follows us. V'halalu Omrim Halacha Kemosenu. And the other side said, no, the halacha follows us. All of a sudden, what happens? Yatzas a baskol v'amr. All of a sudden, a heavenly voice, a batkol, comes out and says, Elu ve'elu, these and these, meaning both sides of the argument. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are all Divrei Elokim Chaim. They're all the words of the living God. Okay, meaning they're all true. Beis Shammai is correct, Beis Hillel is correct. What do? The halacha ke Beis Hillel. But we paskin, we rule like Beis Hillel, and that's the way the halacha follows in almost every machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Third line, after we say that this guy's right and this one's right, so why is it, if they're both right, Why is it that we paskin like Beis Hillel as opposed to Beis Shammai or over Beis Shammai? And the Gemara says at the end of the third line, Mipnei, what's the reason? Shenochin v'aluvim hayu. Because they were sweeter, they were softer, they were more gentle. Vishonin divreihen v'divrei Beis Shammai. And they learned not only their own opinion, but they also, Vishonin, Mishnah, they also learned and repeated the words of Beis Shammai. They studied their opinion as well as the opinion of Beis Shammai. And not only did they didn't only study Beis Shammai's opinion, they studied Beis Shammai's opinion before their own opinion. So the Gemara tells us a fabulous thing that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, they argued for 3 years. How are we going to paskin like Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai? They're both right. So the Gemara says that all of a sudden the only way to answer the question was God needed to answer the question. Yatzas a Baskol comes out, and he says, we're going to pass Elu ve'elu, they're both right. And that phrase is important. Elu ve'elu, divrei Elokim chayim. These, both sides of the argument, both sides are they're true, and both sides are the words of the living God. Right? But why therefore do we pass on like Beis Hillel? Because Beis Hillel was more they were more gentle and more understanding, nicer, sweeter, however exactly want to understand that that specific Gemara. And then we say that Beis Hillel also learned Beis Shammai's opinions, and even learned Beis Shammai's opinions before authoring their own opinions. We have a similar-ish type Gemara, which we're going to learn. This is the Gemara in Chagiga near the very, very beginning on Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Baalei Asufos. The pasuk in Koheles tells us that there were these Baalei Asufos. There were these like masters of gatherings, groupings, assemblies. Who are these Baalei Asufos? Elu Talmidei Chachamim. These are the Talmidei Chachamim. Sheyoshim Asufos. The Talmidei Chachamim would sit in little groups, in little clusters. V'oskin b'Torah. They would learn Torah. Halalu mitamin v'halo mitarin. Some would say, right? Some of these groups would say, in this case, it's tameh. You're impure. The halalu mitaharin. While others would declare what? They would say, no, you pronounce the guy the tahor, pronounce the guy pure, pronounce the guy clean. So, another case, halalu osim halalu matirin. Some would say, no, this is aser, and other groups would argue, and they would say, it's mutter, it's permissible. Or you have another case, halalu poslin. Some would say, no, you're disqualified. The halalu machshirin, and say, no, you're not disqualified, you're kosher. Shema, right? So now you have this case where everyone's arguing. All these Talmidei Chachamim are in the room, right? And they're all arguing with each other. You have machlokas, like we know with Judaism, that's the answer to every question. What's the halacha? The halacha is a machlokas. But what do we do with this? Gemara says there's a danger to that. There's a real downside to having machlokas. Why? Shema yomer adam heichani lami Torah me'ata. So perhaps the person is going to say, how can I ever learn Torah and really fully understand it when every issue is subject to disagreement, right? Talmud lomar kulam. That's why the pasuk says nitnu meiroa echad. That the pasuk comes to teach me that all these things, all the halachos, all the opinions, what happens? They were nitnu meiroa echad. They all came from one shepherd, right? Kel echad nitanav. One God gave them. Parnes echad amran, and one leader said them mipi adon kol amasim baruchu. Right? One shepherd, meaning God, gave it to one parnes, to one leader, and he said all of these things. Right? Dichsiv vayidaber Elokim es kol hadvarim ha'elas. We say in Aseret Adibros that God came and God said all of these things. Meaning, what this Gemara is hinting at is that all of the opinions that we see in Shas, we see Rabbi Yochanan against Reish Lakish, and we see Rabbi Eliezer against Rabbi Yeshua, and we see Rava against Abaye. We see all these machlokas, and then later on the Shach and the Taz, and we have Rav Moshe against Rav Shlomo Zalman, or whoever it is. All these machlokasim, all these disagreements, all these arguments in halacha, in Torah. So it seems like that God ultimately taught all of that. All the opinions that we paskin like, that we rule like, and those opinions that we don't rule like, God gave all of those. God gave all of those answers over. So, and it's a similar idea of elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. And this is not new to any student of Torah. You could be a novice of Torah. You could be a novice of learning. You could be a big scholar. You know that in the realm of parshanut, in the realm of machshava, Jewish thought, Jewish philosophy, and even in halacha, there is always a diversity of opinion, and interpretation is just pervasive throughout the entire corpus of serious Torah learning. So, and obviously the major difficulty within these two Gemaras, the Gemara in Eruvin, which gives us the phrase Elu ve'elu, and then this Gemara in Chagiga with the different asufos, the different groupings, but ultimately saying that all these opinions really come from one Roa, from the shepherd, from one God. How could contradictory, right? If one says it's usr, that you're not allowed, prohibited, and one says mutter, you are allowed. How can two contradictory opinions? How can they all both be the words of the living God? Divrei Elokim Chaim. Isn't one correct and one incorrect? So we're going to see a number of approaches to this question. We're going to start with the opinion of the Ritva. The Ritva was one of the great Rishonim. Okay, the Ritva was, and here's a Gemara on source 3. The Ritva, on source 3. He tells us. Here we go. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Shalu Rabbeinu Tzarfat. The rabbis of Tzarfat, the rabbis of France, which he's probably referring to the Balei Tosfos. The Tosfos were from Germany and France, so maybe specifically the rabbis of France. I don't know. He asks our question. He asks everybody's question. How could it possibly be that both things which seem to be almost contradictory, how can they both be the words of the living God? One saying something is usr, it's prohibited. And this one saying it's allowed. How could they both be God's answer? How could they both be the words of God? Second line where it's underlined, v'tirtzu, and they answer. They give a teretz. Kikasha'ala Moshe Lamaro, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up on high to Har Sinai, Likabel Torah, to accept the Torah, Her Ulo Al Kol Davar V'Davar, on every halachic case, God showed him, Her Ulo Al Kol Davar V'Davar, Memtet, 49 panim le'isser, 49 arguments, 49 approaches to say usser, 49 approaches to prohibit, to give an answer of usser. And umemtes panim leheter, and 49 approaches that it is that the answer to this question is you're a mutter, it's it's permissible. Okay, so meaning all these arguments that why why you can go swimming on Shabbos, on Yom Tov you can't go swimming, whatever the answer is, all the arguments were already given to Moshe Rabbeinu in Har Sinai. So they are the divrei Elokim Chaim. They're the words of the living God. So, middle of the third line, V'shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu hazeh. So Moshe Rabbeinu asked God about this. V'amar, and he said, Shehei zem matzur l'chachmei Yisrael, shebechol dor v'dor v'yechra b'kemosam. He says, fine. All these things are the words of the living God. How are we going to act? How are we going to paskin? How are we going to rule? How are we going to adjudicate? Means the Chachamim in every generation, Rabbi Akiva Eiger is going to answer for his generation, and the Vilna Gaon is going to answer, and if Moshe is going to answer, and in their generation, the Chachamim are going to come and they're going to say how we practically answer that question and what we do, how we live in terms of practical halacha. But in terms of the world of learning, all the ideas, all the arguments that are posed really are divrei Elokim Chaim. So this is what we see, right? So basically what he's saying, the initial approach is that Judaism believes in what we're going to call multiple truths. And the opinions of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, Rav and Abaye, the Rambam and the Ravid, the Ramban and everybody, the Shach and the Taz, they're all divrei Elokim Chaim because originally they were all conceived by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is going to be the most maximalist, right? Most maximalist approach to this question. That really everything is God's thought, and God had thought of these ideas, and God gave it basically by sharing them with Moshe Rabbeinu. There's kashrus, there's kosherness. They're all kosher to a certain extent. in Jewish theology and Jewish hashkafa, they're all good. They're all from God. It's just we need to know how to act. Do I have to have 4 meals on Shabbos, or do I have to have 3 meals on Shabbos? So there's a reason why one of the opinions in the Gemara says I have to have 4 meals on Shabbos, and there's an opinion why I have to have 3. So the 4 is also Divrei Elokim Chaim, the Ritva would say, even though in the end we rule that we only need to eat 3 meals on Shabbos. So that's the most maximalist. Now I do want to say there's a Medrash, and you've heard this, Rabbi Lamb has a book called 70 Faces. That is based off of the famous idea that there are Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are 70 faces to Torah. There are 70 avenues to Torah, however exactly you want to understand that. But many explain why 70. So I don't know why the symbolism of the number 70, but it's 70 and not 71. And it's 70 and not 72. Meaning everything every person writes, and every regular Joe, regular Yasala that he writes, he thinks that the halacha should be this way, and the way he wants to understand the Gemara. No. Not everything is in bounds. There are things that are unequivocally wrong. They're outside of Orthodox Jewish dogma. They're wrong, and they're not okay. But within, I guess the Orthodox construct, so there are many avenues, there are many paths, there are many ideas that are kosher. How do we rule? That's for the Chachamim. That's the way the Ritva answers that question. Let's get now to the Nesivos HaMishpat. The Nesivos HaMishpat was is the Nesivos. And he writes in his introduction. So he writes a beautiful thing, and maybe we're going to do this mostly outside. Actually, he says a beautiful idea. It's source 4, the end of the first line. We know that the Torah is compared to mayim. The Torah is compared to water, right? And then he explains. I think it's amazing because he gives I don't know exactly, the Nesivos probably lived in the 1800s, I think maybe the 1900s, probably the 1800s. He compares, he's going to answer Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. He's going to answer it in a comparison to a diver. A diver who's going to the depths of the ocean, the depths of the ocean, and he's swimming all the way down, and he wants to find that perfect jewel. He's looking for pearls. So it says that he's going to go down to the clear water, adim, the strong waters, third beginning of the third line. The jewels, these avnei yakar, these precious jewels. As everything's going around him, right? It's going to be hard for him to see. And it's going to be hard for him to grasp, to get hold. Hahevdel hadak shebeno vein even hacharisit hamunoch etzam mishumim kimat b'mar'eh zeh lezeh v'tachat hasapir ma'aleh chares biyado. What is it? He's going up and he looks and he sees. Oh, this is it. This is the precious. This is the expensive pearl. And he picks it up and he touches it and he looks. No, it's not it. And he throws it away. Right? And he keeps on doing it. He goes down. He picks up a pearl. He picks up what he thinks of it, and it's just a rock. And he goes back and forth, right? And he says in the underline, Ulam achar lito or einav, he looks. Once he comes up, only when he studies what's wrong, and this is the important part, only when he studies what's wrong, will he become more sensitive to the nuance or to whatever it is of what the real pearl is. Meaning only by studying what's wrong will you really understand what's correct. And he says that this is the idea of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. That no. Not everything is really Torah min hashamayim. Not every opinion is good. There really aren't multiple truths. But why is it important to learn both sides? Why is it important to learn and to study and to engage in and to really try to understand the wrong opinions? Because sometimes when you understand the wrong opinions, what was done incorrectly and what was done in a negative fashion, will you only understand how to do it correctly. I'm assuming an architect or a builder right? If you would go walk around a house that wasn't built correctly, you learn a lot from that. You learn a lot from mistakes, right? And ultimately, you could kind of a little bit. Now, I don't know. He doesn't. I don't think he uses it as a proof, but that is why that Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Dafka looked at Beis Shammai's opinions first, because from the negative, from what's wrong, you ultimately are able to learn the positive. This is the most minimalist. The Ritva was the most maximalist, that everything's kosher, everything's great, or almost everything's great, almost everything's wonderful and kosher. This is no. Those things are wrong. But why is there value? Why is there value in looking and looking at the other side? Why, if I'm a Fox News guy, is there important to understand CNN, to understand what's wrong, or vice versa? That's important, right? Then we have what I'll deem as more middle of the road. Middle of the road. You have the extremes of the Ritva and of the Nesivos, and then you have other camps. Well, the first camp is the Kidmas HaEmek. The Kidmas HaEmek is the Netziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. His introduction to the Sefer called the She'iltos of Rav Hai Gaon, and he writes over here, Aval Yesh Kal Machlokas the Chodeya. It's on the top of the backside of the source sheet. Aval Yesh Kama Machlokas the Chodeya Hu Or Bifnei Atzma Shemeir B'Chachmas HaTorah. Every Beis Shammai, and if we paskin like Shmuel's opinion, even though we paskin like Rav in a certain case, all those wrong opinions, all the cases that we do not rule like, they are all Chachmas HaTorah. They're all they're all real Torah. They all have validity. They all have a real important contribution to the Torah. To the Torah. Af al gav she'ein halacha kamoso. Even though we don't rule like that. There is something right, and you could take this to any practical case in your life, right? I decided, let's say, to move to to take one job over another job. That doesn't mean that the other job was wrong. Doesn't mean, right? That job, I could have done great in that job also. I could have been successful in this place or in that job, or raising a child in a certain way, or I could have sent them to a certain school, and that could have been successful also, right? That was an okay thing. I just thought that this one was better, or in this specific case, or for other reasons, right? In the end, we decided to go a different route. But what he really writes is that the idea that's proposed by a specific Tana, or an Amora, or a Rishon, or an Achron, right? In theory is correct. In theory, it's a Torah, it's a valid Torah idea. Yet for whatever reason, it doesn't fit perfectly in the specific case that is being discussed in the Gemara or in the Tshuva or wherever. But it is still part of, as he calls it, Chachmas HaTorah. Moshe Feinstein in Surah 6 says a similar thing. Let's say interesting question. Let's say you were going to learn the opinion of Beis Shammai all day. You know that on today's daf, we're learning Beis Shammai, and we know that we don't paskin like Beis Shammai. Is that a waste of time? Do I have to make a Birkas HaTorah? Right? We know that there's a halacha that before I learn Torah, I have to make a Birkas HaTorah. Okay, in the morning we do that, and then it covers us for the entire day. So he says, let's say I knew I was going to study Beis Shammai the whole day, right? So he says, of course you have to. Why? Because it's Divrei Torah Mamish. Rav Moshe agrees with the Nitziv that the rejected opinions in Chazal, right? The rejected opinions in Chazal are still real Torah. You still need to make a Birkas HaTorah on them. So it's a little bit it's definitely much more than the Nesivos, but it's not that everything it's not as grandiose or accepting or maximalist as the Ritva. Similarly, but different, is Rashi. Rashi in Kesubis makes a different case. He writes that aval in the underline, ki pligi trei amorai bedin o beisr beheter. If two rabbis are arguing about two amoraim, he specifically writes, are arguing about a specific din, a specific law. Kol chad amar hachi mistaber, and they all give their reasons. It's not sheker. The guy who's wrong is not wrong. The guy who we don't rule like is not wrong. Rather, in this specific case, right? in this specific, in a given situation, we don't rule like him. But he's not wrong. What he's saying is not drivel. It's not nonsense. It's not craziness. It's not incorrect. It's not false. It's not off. Right? Rather, it just doesn't necessarily apply in this given case. That's Rashi's shita. So that is another one of these middle approaches. Right? So we see that there's different approaches, different views and attitudes, and that according to most, not necessarily the Nesivos, that all these different ideas are valid, they're genuine, they are bona fide, they are legitimate. Okay, but why do I think this whole idea is so important? First of all, that that there are multiple truths in our day and age. I think is very, very important for people not only to understand Barosh, to comprehend in their minds, but to also internalize. And what was so great about the Amoraim? What was so great about? Let's skip to the last source. We're going to skip the source number 8, but source number 10 is a Gemara in Yevamos. I think this is absolutely delicious, but not only sweet and beautiful, so crucial, vital, important for our society. Everyone should learn this Gemara. Everyone should learn the Gemara in Eruvin and finish with this Gemara in Yevamos. Af al pi shenechleku beishamai ubeis Hillel, right? Betzaros ubeachayos. Even though Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argued about serious issues, okay? But we'll get back to what the serious issues are. Lo nimnu, they did not hold back. Lo nimnu Beis Shammai milisa nashim mi Beis Hillel. Velo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai. Meaning, the families of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, they married each other. They will call them intermarried, right? They married. Lilamdecha shechiba v'reyus noagim zeh b'zeh. They loved each other. They had the full respect and admiration of each other. They disagreed vehemently, but it was never personal. They just disagreed. Now, what the Gemara is saying, they disagreed about serious issues. Let's say I think you should have, the lulav. This is how dry, for a lulav to be puzzle, this is how dry it needs to be. And for a lulav to be, or let's say Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, that's not a good argument. Let's say we know the famous Beis Hillel Beis Shammai by Hanukkah. Hillel says night 1 is 1 candle, night 2 is 2 candles, night 3, that's like what we do. Beis Shammai says no, night number 1 is 8 candles, and then 7, 6. Okay, that's a big machlokas, right? Okay, but that's not a real, that's a machlokas. Okay, fine, that doesn't affect your life. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argued, obviously, about Shabbos and about Chagim and this and that. But they also argued about issues of agunos. They argued about issues of now, if one is going to say that this person can remarry, and this person doesn't, right? If they hold different things, now the kids that this new marriage has, that they have from this new marriage, they could be, according to Beis Shammai, could be illegitimate children. According what happens in terms of gerus, in terms of who is a Jew, they argued about. Serious machlokasim, serious issues, not just candles 1 to 8 or 8 to 1. And still the Gemara says they allowed their kids to marry each other. Imagine if a huge Trump supporter, his daughter, who's also a huge Trump, came over, and this guy, with the biggest Biden person in the world. It's almost unfathomable. Sadly, it's unfathomable. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had much, much, much more critical disagreements than 2021 politics. But they had enough admiration and respect for the other person's opinion that they intermarried. I don't mean intermarried, chas v'shalom. They married each other's families. What a beautiful thing. Lo nimnu Beis Shammai melisa nashim Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai didn't say you can't date them, right? They didn't hold back their nashim, their women, their daughters, from marrying into the men of Beis Hillel. Velo Beis Hillel, mi Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel the same thing. Amazing, beautiful. And let's finish with the Aruch HaShulchan. This Aruch HaShulchan, you could say this, or you just get excited to say this Aruch HaShulchan any day of the week. This is out of this world. Okay, here we go. This is in his introduction, the Aruch HaShulchan, his introduction to the Choshen Mishpat part of his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. So we know that in Parshas Ha'azinu, the Torah is referred to as a shira. as a song. Kisvu lachem es hashira hazos. The final, the last, the 613th mitzvah in the Torah is that each and every Jew is commanded to write a Sefer Torah. Many different ways how to fulfill that mitzvah. But the mitzvah is to write the Torah, to write over the Torah. But it doesn't say Kisvu lachem es haTorah hazos. It says Kisvu lachem es hashira hazos. A shira is a song. So he says, why is it that that Torah is compared to a song? Listen to this. It's Shabbos Shira. Beautiful. This week we're reading Parshas Beshalach in Shul. All right, with Az Yashir. This is amazing. Hashkacha that we're giving this year today. Beautiful. Okay. Here we go. Underline. V'chol HaTorah kula nikrei Shira. The entire Torah is called a Shira. V'tif eres hashir and the beauty of a shir. Why a shir? Why a song? When is a song most beautiful? Kishahakolos mishunim zeh mizeh. When you have different voices, we'll call them harmony. When you have harmony, when you have different types of voices that are in a choir all together, or different types of instruments all together, right? In the orchestra, right? That is vizehu ikar hani'imut. That is the essence of its anima, of its pleasure, of its pleasantness. The real pleasantness of Torah comes from the different voices, from the many voices. Umisha mishotet bayam hatalmud, and someone who's inside the yam hatalmud, the Torah, the water of the Torah, the sea of the Torah. Yira ni'imus mishunos b'chol hakolos hamishunos. From all the divergence of opinions, from all the multiplicity of ideas and opinions and approaches to different cases, what do you see? That's where you really see the beauty of Torah. That's where you really see the ni'imus of a specific idea, or really of Torah. That's the delicious nature of that one sees in Torah. What a beautiful, beautiful idea. And that's why this Gemara of Elu ve'elu Divrei Elokim Chaim is so needed, and it's so important, and it's so crucial. And we'll just finish with a Yehi Ratzon, that all of these diverse opinions and attitudes and outlooks in our community and in society at large, that they serve really to enrich and enhance rather than to detract and diminish. And may we all be able to enjoy the harmonious symphony of community, bi'ahava u'bi'achva, in love and in brotherhood and in community and connectedness. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Elu ve'elu Divrei Elokim Chayim.